The reservation is confirmed for 7. This person will be seated separately, please. That voice ringing out cheerfully belonged to my mother-in-law, a woman who relishes giving me a hard time. But that's all going to end today. Knowing a secret, I've decided to expose everything in front of all of our relatives. My name is Emily. I'm a 28-year-old chef. After graduating from culinary school, I found work in a well-known Western restaurant where I met my husband, Chris, who was a regular customer. My husband runs a family-owned electronics store in our local area, which has been in his family for 3 generations. Last year, after his father passed away, Chris formally took over as the 3rd-generation owner of the store. As for me, I come from a very ordinary household, but my father, mother, and my elder brother are all chefs like me. Perhaps because of that, I've had many opportunities to cook since I was a child, along with my natural talent. I graduated at the top of my class from culinary school. I am rather shy, but cooking has always been my pride and joy. At least that was the case before I married Chris. As soon as we got married, I started living with my mother-in-law. Chris has always lived at home, and his father's death was still recent, so he pleaded with me to move in because he was worried about his mother. I was looking forward to our married life. I knew that since Chris was the eldest son, we would have to live with his mother someday, but I never thought it would happen this soon. I thought I should have told him about my reservations before we got married, but the circumstances were what they were, and I didn't want to be seen as an unpleasant woman. But what's done is done. However, when we started living together, my mother-in-law was very kind at first. She brought me home cream puffs from the bakery I liked, and regarding the household chores, she, being a housewife, would say, "You're working, so it's fine," and took on most of the work herself. She cooked every meal, but I could never get used to her taste. No matter what she cooked, the taste was always too strong. I heard that she was originally from the southern part of the country. I remember seeing on TV or reading somewhere that people from the South prefer salty foods. But that's just one example. Some of my coworkers from the South prefer less salty food. However, my mother-in-law's dish was beyond that level. When she made a stew, it was so black that I couldn't tell what the ingredients were. Of course, when I tasted it, it was like drinking barbecue sauce. She would say, "You need a strong flavor to help you eat your bread, right? Come on, Emily, have some more." I can't. It's too salty. When I glanced at Chris, he said, "Did you make it less salty today?" "Do you notice? I wasn't sure about Emily's preference, so I made it a bit less salty." What? Like this? I was terrified. For a while, we continued to live like this, but my job started to suffer, perhaps because I was constantly eating my mother-in-law's cooking. My tongue was numb and I couldn't taste anything. Luckily, I always had the head chef check my work at the end, and I never got any reprimands. However, feeling this wouldn't do, I started getting up earlier than my mother-in-law, at least for breakfast. That seemed to lessen my troubles during work. Strangely enough, my mother-in-law's attitude toward me turned increasingly frosty. She began to ignore my greetings. Then she started criticizing the food I cooked. It's tasteless. Emily, don't forget to season just because you're busy. What's your game?" "Wait, what? Mother-in-law, I've seasoned it properly. Here, taste it." I had her taste it, but she retorted, "Your seasoning is bland. Can't you even understand that? But adding more would be unhealthy. What's wrong with enjoying good food? Don't get too carried away just because you're good at cooking." With that, she poured in an excessive amount of soy sauce over the dish I had prepared. I never got carried away, and I'm worried about our health here. I had an idea about what triggered this sudden change in my mother-in-law's attitude. It was something that happened at a birthday party for my sister-in-law's daughter at our house. My husband has 2 sisters, both already married and living separately. They are both friendly people who said things like, "If you ever experience any bullying from your mother-in-law, let us know. We'll scold her for you." They've always been very kind to me despite our brief acquaintance. Their husbands are also nice, gentle people. The older sister has a daughter, and we had her 5th birthday party at our house, where I helped mother-in-law with the cooking. The dining table was filled with various dishes. It was quite clear who made what. The party started, and my sister-in-law said, "Our daughter really loves the omelet rice from the restaurant where Emily works. It's a dream come true to have it at home today." I'm happy to hear that. Actually, I'm in charge of making the omelet at work. When I replied, the birthday girl also praised me. "The food from the omelet lady is delicious." Watching these conversations, my mother-in-law was not amused. "Look, Grandma's stew is also delicious." She tried to get her granddaughter to eat her signature dish, but the little girl protested. "No, it hurts my mouth when I eat that." My sister's husbands, being considerate, did eat my mother-in-law's food, but after just a few bites, they asked me, "Sorry, could I get some more water?" Their water glasses were empty after just a few bites. "Hey, your seasoning has always been salty, but this is beyond common sense. Maybe Emily could teach you some cooking?" When my sister-in-law suggested this jokingly, my mother-in-law got angry and stormed out of the room, refusing to come back. I wished I hadn't cooked, but it was something my mother-in-law had asked me to do, and I couldn't do anything about it. The party ended early due to the tense atmosphere. My sister-in-law meant it as a joke, but it would hurt if the food you made was criticized. It must have been the same for my mother-in-law, who prepared the food hoping everyone would enjoy it. That night, I apologized to my mother-in-law. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," to which she replied, "Don't get too comfortable. You're just a freeloader." The next morning, the intense mother-in-law bullying started. My mother-in-law would douse the breakfast I prepared with seasoning without even tasting it. If it was too brutal, it was disposed right in front of me. Naturally, I consulted my husband, Chris, about this, but he just said things like, "Aren't you being too cheeky? You should have just listened to what my mom said." Or, "You're overthinking it," as if it was none of my business. To top it all off, despite us only being married for half a year, Chris started coming home later and later, often not returning until the date had changed. He kept using his work as an excuse, even skipping his niece's birthday party. That's the kind of man he was. Our marital life was falling apart. Of course, I thought about divorcing, but we had only been married for 6 months, and I knew it would upset our parents, so I hesitated to take the plunge. Then one day, an event occurred that worsened the situation even further. My mother-in-law slipped on the stairs and injured her leg. My sister-in-law offered to come and help, but incredibly, my mother-in-law chose me. She said, "You're technically the wife, so you should at least do this much. It's outrageous that you're trying to rely on my daughter." From then on, I was being summoned by my mother-in-law even for trivial matters. She started contacting me even during work hours, causing me to ask for time off each time. My coworkers told me it was okay, but I felt guilty and eventually quit my job. My mother-in-law, as if she had been waiting for this moment, laughed at me, saying, "Can't do your proud job anymore. How pitiful." From then on, not only during the day, but also at night, I was suddenly summoned by my mother-in-law, and I had no time to rest. Even when I tried to talk to Chris, there were more and more days when he wouldn't come home. He said he was sleeping in his company's office, but I'm sure that was a lie. I had already made up my mind. However, I couldn't just leave without doing anything, so I decided to take revenge on them. Later on, while the 3 of us were having breakfast, I brought up the topic. "Please divorce me." They both looked surprised, saying, "What are you talking about? We haven't been married for a year yet. It's you who will be laughed at. Are you thinking I'm cheating? Ridiculous." "That's right. You're embarrassing us in public. Emily, you're really out of line." Even though I was made fun of by the 2 of them, I was not swayed and said, "Chris is not at home. My mother-in-law only knows how to bully her daughter-in-law. Who would want to live in such a house? I will divorce. My mind won't change." Seeing an unusually determined me, the 2 of them seemed panicked, and Chris said, "We're sorry. I'll try to come home as early as possible. You can even go back to your parents' home for a while, but my mom has this leg issue. I have work. So could you stay here at least until her leg heals? Chris said that, but it was probably hard for him to apologize, and that was clearly shown on his face. I was not being very mature. I'm sorry. Can't you stay with us a bit longer? Your feelings might change. To which I replied, understood. The moment I said that, they both grinned as if to say, she's easy. They are, indeed, a mother and a son. After that, the bullying stopped and Chris started coming home earlier. But such peaceful times didn't last long. My husband, Chris, started coming home late again, and the harassment from my mother-in-law resumed. My mother-in-law's leg didn't heal at all, yet she frequently went out claiming it to be a hospital visit. Finding this peculiar, I ended up discovering a shocking truth. A few days later, my cell phone was blowing up with calls. The callers were, of course, my mother-in-law and Chris. When I answered the call from Chris, he said, "Hey, where the hell are you? What are you doing leaving my mom like this?" Chris, on the other end of the phone, was pretty furious. I didn't care whether this man was angry or not, so I replied, "Huh? I'm at my parents' house. What's wrong with that? It was you who told me I could go home." "What are you talking about? My mom's leg isn't healed, right?" I heard someone making a ruckus in the background. I recognized the voice. It was my mother-in-law. I said, "Anyway, I'm not going back to that house. Please contact me through a lawyer from now on," and hung up. For a while after that, I enjoyed some peaceful times. During my stay at my parents' house, they made lots of my favorite dishes. I also cooked for my parents, and when my mother said, "Emily's cooking is the best," I couldn't help but shed tears. A few days later, I received a call from a certain person. I was surprised to see the name displayed, because the caller was my detested mother-in-law. It was an apology for her past behavior and an invitation to her birthday party, which was to be held the next week. She insisted that I attend. The venue was a fancy restaurant near the station. The chef at the restaurant had recently changed, a man who had trained in France. It was a place that was becoming popular because you could taste authentic French cuisine. Of course, I was under no obligation to attend, but I thought it would be a good opportunity, so I agreed happily. My mother-in-law was overjoyed and sent me the date and time, insisting that I must come. On the day of my birthday party the following week, Chris and my mother-in-law were already at the entrance of the restaurant. As soon as they saw me, he seemed to be smirking. The members were the same as the last party, 2 couples of sisters-in-law and their little girl, including my mother-in-law, husband, and me. It's a total of 8. The sisters-in-law hadn't been told about the divorce yet, and I was asked to keep it a secret because they intended to tell them at the end of today's meal. In the middle of all of this, the sisters-in-law and their husbands showed up. "Emily, long time no see. You look great, as always." They were kind. Once everyone had arrived, we entered the restaurant. As soon as we entered the restaurant, a waiter greeted us. "Is this a reservation for 7 people?" 7? We're 8, though. While I was thinking that, my mother-in-law loudly exclaimed, "The reservation is correct. It's for 7 people. We would like this person to be seated separately, please." Of course, this person referred to me. As proof, she grabbed my shoulder and pushed me forward. Looking back, the sisters-in-law and their husbands had a puzzled look on their faces, but my husband and mother-in-law were smirking. So this was their plan. How silly. "Emily has a surprise, doesn't she?" said my mother-in-law. Who on earth tells about a surprise at their own birthday party? Right in front of me. "Well then, if she likes surprises so much, I'll happily give her one." "Emily, is that true?" The sisters-in-law looked worried, so I said, "That's right. I was trying to keep it a secret, but my mother-in-law figured it out. Excuse me, is there a vacant seat?" When I asked the waiter, he kindly guided me to a seat. The table was out of sight from my in-laws, which was nice because I didn't have to see those people. After that, the in-laws enjoyed their meal for a while. A kid's meal was being prepared for the sister-in-law's daughter, and she was very happy, saying, "Amazing! This tastes just like my sister's omelet." The sisters-in-law also seemed to enjoy their food, saying it was delicious. For some reason, my mother-in-law was proud, saying, "See, ever since the chef changed, the taste has improved significantly. The meat dishes after this are exquisite," she bragged proudly. In harmony with that, my husband nods in agreement. Next, it was finally time for the meat dish that my mother-in-law had been talking about to be served. A delicious-looking dish was placed in front of my sister-in-law and her husband, but no matter how long we waited, no food was brought to my mother-in-law and husband. Growing impatient, they summoned the waiter and demanded, "What's going on here?" The loudness of my mother-in-law's voice echoed throughout the restaurant, something that seemed out of place in a fancy restaurant. Some customers even grimaced at the commotion. "The chef himself will be bringing your dishes. Please wait a little longer." When the waiter replied in this manner, my mother-in-law responded, "Oh, really? Is it because we frequent this place so much?" She didn't seem completely displeased. "Sorry for the wait." They turned around as if to say, "We've been waiting." But upon seeing who brought their dishes, their eyes bulged out in shock. And no wonder, standing in front of them, clad in a chef's coat, was me. "What? Emily? What are you doing?" "Aha! So that's what a surprise is! Emily, you're full of surprises." While the in-laws said this, my husband and mother-in-law had faces that said, "This was not what we were expecting." I laid out the dishes without caring. "I made this especially for you based on your preferences." The dish placed in front of my mother-in-law was a black lump doused in a plentiful amount of black sauce. Of course, it was thoroughly flavored with soy sauce. "For the final touch, please add this," I said, pouring extra soy sauce on for her. She was shocked and froze on the spot. "Furthermore, we also have a special menu for this customer." I placed a plate in front of my husband, haphazardly lined with batteries ranging from size AA to D. "And for an additional flavor, please use this," I said, placing an entire bottle of soy sauce right in front of him. Because he always harps on about work, I arranged batteries for my husband, who loves his job as an electrician. I even selected the most expensive batteries sold at other electronic stores, so I expect some gratitude. Seeing this, my nieces were laughing hard. My sister-in-law and her husband had looks on their faces that said, "Isn't this a bit too much?" My mother-in-law and husband with red faces yelled, "You're making fools of us and this restaurant for allowing such a thing. Call the manager." As my husband said this, the manager appeared and said, "That would be me." "What the hell are you thinking? We are the customers here. We'll sue you." Hearing that, the manager replied simply, "Is that so? In that case, we'll be suing you two for disrupting our business." "Huh?" was their response. It seems that the two of them frequently patronized this restaurant and had always acted arrogantly towards the staff. They had a reputation for nitpicking things like, "This is too bland," or "This has no flavor," and never considered the inconvenience they were causing other customers. They were well known as troublesome complainers. "We've tolerated it until now because you're family, but it seems we'll finally be able to distance ourselves. We won't hold back, right, Emily?" "Yeah, big brother." Upon hearing this, the two of them looked surprised and turned their gazes towards us. Actually, this restaurant has been managed by my brother for some time now. My brother works in France, and he couldn't make it back home when I got married due to his busy schedule. Although he sent his congratulations, my mother-in-law and my husband, Bob, had never met him. Since my brother had been sent family photos, he knew what mother-in-law and Bob looked like. "I apologize for not being able to attend your wedding. I wanted to reach out multiple times, but you both always had company." Upon hearing this, their faces turned pale. Feeling the conversation was getting long, my sisters-in-law told their husbands to head home first, then suggested, "Should we dig into this further?" They were smiling, but their eyes weren't. Seeing the usually cheerful two of them looking like that, it gave me a bit of a chill. It's just business. You know, the old guys in the main street, they like these trendy places nowadays. Chris uttered this, and as he did, a waiter approached and handed over an earring, saying, "Your guest left this behind last time." "You're dining with men who wear earrings? Isn't that sketchy?" my sister-in-law commented. I couldn't help but laugh. "No, sister-in-law, this man has been having an affair with a woman who works at a florist across his shop." Chris's face turned ghostly pale. He looked at me as if asking how I knew, but I had hired a private investigator some time ago. My intuition was correct. Chris had been meeting the woman almost every day after work. This restaurant seemed to be her favorite, and they visited almost every week. Photos of them entering a hotel together and other evidences were plentiful. "I'm serious about her. Marrying you was a mistake. I'll gladly divorce you." Chris, who had been reluctant about divorce, had suddenly changed his stance. Of course, this was quite convenient for me, who wanted a divorce as soon as possible. "Sure, but I'll be claiming alimony, so make sure to pay." "I just landed a big contract recently. I'll gladly pay," he laughed. "That's good to hear. Then about you, mother-in-law." Up until then, my mother-in-law, who had been silent, shivered. She was not as much of a regular here as Chris, but she was a regular nonetheless. "But I'm already a widow. It doesn't matter." Upon hearing her say this, I decided to share another fact. "I had the PI look into you as well, mother-in-law. Your relationship with your partner seems to be going on for about 5 years. But wait, didn't father-in-law pass away just last year?" "What?" Upon hearing this, my sisters-in-law glared at their mother in anger. No surprise there, the two sisters-in-law were closer to their late father than their mother. Learning the truth, they were furious. I was also surprised, but it seemed strange how detailed the PI was about my mother-in-law. Upon asking, it turns out my father-in-law also hired the same investigator. "You've been lying about Dad all along, and Chris, you're cheating on Emily. Are you two out of your minds?" The sisters-in-law's anger showed no signs of cooling down. Seeing that it was disturbing other customers, we decided to disperse for the day and regroup at the in-laws' house another day. That day, I said goodbye to my brother and the staff with high fives. A few days later, the divorce papers were filled out in the presence of my two sisters-in-law. My husband, completely unapologetic, was saying things like, "Well, just don't regret it, huh?" "Really, despite my poor mobility, I ended up with such an outrageous wife," she grumbled. Tired of his incessant complaints, I shouted, "Watch your step, mother-in-law," and she jumped, exclaiming, "What?" Indeed, her leg was perfectly healed. Even though it was healed, she continued to pretend it was painful just to torment me. Such a spiteful woman she was. But to me, she was now nothing more than a stranger. And so, my married life ended in less than a year. I didn't regret it at all. Later, alimony for both my ex-husband and the woman was deposited into my account. Since it was deposited simultaneously, I assume my husband paid for the woman's portion too. But that's beside the point. As for the pair afterwards, despite going into debt to pay the alimony, my husband was promptly dumped after the divorce. I later learned from my sister-in-law that the woman was infamous in her hometown as a home wrecker. My ex-husband had bragged about landing a big contract, but as it turns out, the day we were at the restaurant, there were mostly regular customers. And upon us leaving the restaurant after having to deal with the complaining couple, applause erupted, my brother told me. By the way, I was told by my brother that there were only reservations of 7, so I figured there was no place for me to begin with, which is why I had thought of this plan. Of course, they are now banned from the restaurant. Word of their misconduct had spread, and it seems they lost that big contract. They deserve it, I suppose. It's an electronics store that seems to run on trust. Prospering in the future will likely be difficult. As for my mother-in-law, she was dumped too, and on top of that, when she went to the hospital due to poor health, it was found that her long-term dietary habits were to blame, and that even with treatment, her body would never return to normal. She deserves this as well. As for me, I've returned to work at the Western-style restaurant I used to work at. Despite the trouble I had caused, they warmly welcomed me back. "Hey, omelet lady!" My sisters-in-law still frequently visit the restaurant. They've cut ties with their mother and brother since that incident. They couldn't forgive them for neglecting me, who they had treated like a little sister and deceived their father the whole time. And they have no intention of forgiving them in the future. Despite everything, I'm happiest when I'm cooking. I'm the happiest I've ever been right now.